Prologue. 7:46 a.m. Lahore. The early morning scent of damp earth and mown grass greeted him as the doors of the overcrowded bus were thrown open. A child, having lost control of his bowels, had caused the driver to make an unscheduled stop. The old bus groaned, its pistons emitting loud whistles as it ground against the curb. The people scrambling out in droves, some muttering, others hurling curses at the child who sat cowering in the soiled seat, his red knickers stained brown. His mother sat beside him, fanning her face with her malmal dupatta, a disapproving frown etched between unplucked eyebrows. The bus conductor simply slid the dusty windows open in an attempt to lure a breeze, ignoring the mess on the seat. While something like that would usually drive him crazy, it didn't affect Ismail today. He was grateful to step out sooner than planned. It gave him more time to revel in the glory he was bringing his family, his entire village. Wrapping his shawl around him, he whistled a familiar tune from an Indian film, the one where the actress struck up all manner of provocative poses, causing the movie halls to erupt with hooting. The tune did nothing for him, but appearing inconspicuous was paramount. Sliding his hand along the rusted bars lining the sidewalk, he strolled toward the great den of activity, the chowk. In the absence of the thick layer of smog that usually pervaded the city, the chowk looked almost beautiful in the embrace of sunny blue skies. The fruit vendors shouted out tempting prices from their carts as they scratched their armpits. Cars attempted to make their way through the gathering mess. The traffic wardens were absent, the dysfunctional traffic signal watching over everything like a silent ghost. A tangy smell emanated from the public park beyond, where a group of gardeners were busy with antiquated lawn mowers, bits of grass flying in the air like dust. The blueness of the sky reflected off puddles of water on the pavement. The crisp March breeze stirred his hair. It was exactly the kind of day those foreigner Goras called beautiful. Perfect, he thought, smiling to himself. Luck proved to be on his side all the way through. The chowk was packed. And in the midst of the hundreds of people commuting to work or selling their wares, he was as good as invisible. Walking alongside a donkey cart loaded with cheap furniture, he peeped into the residential colony guarded by barricades. The quaintness of the area was a glaring antithesis to the loud, swarming mess of the chowk. His nose drew him toward the aroma of manure where a pair of black buffaloes idled in an open field littered with garbage. For a moment, he froze. Disgusting, but the stench bore the unmistakable stamp of home, of mud, walls and open drains, and it was with reluctance that he pulled himself away. Shaking his head at the familiar sight of steaming dung, round cakes of which had been plastered on the walls lining the field. Focusing on the task at hand, he edged closer to the enclosed colony, his eyes searching for the policeman responsible for the morning shift. The policeman in question seemed to be in significant distress, the way his head swiveled in every direction, and his fists clenched and unclenched. Ismail sent up a silent prayer of thanks as he caught him abandoning his post at the most opportune moment, presumably huddling off for a leak with one hand firmly clutched around his genitals. Who would have imagined that a full bladder would be a catalyst to such destruction? Don't presume anything. Don't allow overconfidence to swamp you. The words rang clear in his head. Everything is God's will. Wasn't this what he had been learning for years now? Let this be a lesson for the murderers, those traitors who have ravaged the country, uprooted families, destroyed legacies. Let this be a solid punch in the CIA's gut. He navigated his way past the concrete barricades like a silent shadow, his muscles taut in case he had to break into a run. Adrenaline coursed through His veins, his empty stomach groaned, but he maintained a clear head, and strolled past the checkpoint without inviting any suspicious eyes in his direction. He arrived at the junction between the tranquil streets without incident, but even though he had memorized the route, for a moment everything looked the same to him, idyllic streets with concrete and brick houses rising in both directions. This part of the city held none of the rustic allure of his village. Its over-reliance on concrete depressed him, made him think of prisons and subservience. He took a deep breath, and closed his eyes, allowing his mind to guide him in the proper direction. As his breathing calmed, the map of the area lit up like a bulb in the darkness, and he recalled the directions that had been given, first right, and the third left from there. Another 10 minutes of suspense, but it seemed that he had at last arrived at the desired place. The dented black gate stood out like an anomaly, quite unlike its shiny counterparts that lined the entire street. It did, however, serve its purpose of shielding the short one-story building from view. To the ordinary person, it would look like an abandoned place with the white paint peeling off the walls, revealing ugly graffiti. A clever ruse. He stepped closer, visualizing how the end would be, and a plethora of confusing notions assaulted his mind. How would it feel? Would it hurt? Would he feel the head splicing off his body, and rolling across the floor? Would he even feel a hint of the savage triumph he had been promised? The voice of their leader rang in his head again like a drum beat. It will be painless for you, Jihadi, but the pain of those kafirs, those non-believers, will be unimaginable. Remember, they are not humans, they do not feel. They do not love. You shall be rewarded for this noble deed, my boy, you will go to heaven. Kill those kafirs. Kill those kafirs. He recited it like a mantra in an attempt to ward off other, more disturbing thoughts. The cocoon of indifference he had created around himself threatened to burst, and reveal something ugly, something forbidden, something that smelled like fear. He felt an urgent need to tear away the shawl, and fling the jacket into the rubbish, leaving the button intact, and the world unchanged. Was this what going to heaven was like? Through so much pain, through such cruelty? Did he have to stoop as low as those Goras to exact revenge? Coward! These were the workings of Shaitan, the Satan. Their leader had warned him about this. Shaitan will tempt him, try to deter him from the virtuous path to that of sin and cowardice. He must fight this. He trudged toward the ancient gate, the breeze drying beads of sweat that had erupted across his forehead. His hand slipped inside the shawl. Kill those kafirs. An ice cream van approached. The gate to a house on his left opened. A woman emerged, carrying a small child in her arms as the ice cream van blared the familiar tune that heralded happiness, lighting up the faces of children everywhere. He paused, waiting for the child to receive his ice cream. He thought the child deserved that much. Ismail watched him as he slurped it down, resting his head on the woman's shoulder. Possibly her son, he thought. Not so long ago, he had done the same, rested his head on his mother's shoulder as his father came back from a hard day's work, smelling of sunshine and well-earned sweat. Not so long ago, he had been innocent too. Oblivious to everything happening around him, running alongside the ditches with his siblings, relishing the potent possibility of falling into the black muck. So filthy, and yet so exciting. Until they had bombed his village. Killed his entire family while he brought back fried fish for dinner. Everything lost in a second. He remembered the polythene bag speckled with condensation falling to The floor with a wet smack, the crusted fish sliding out on the floor. Slick. With congealing blood, the floor wore the red color of shame, the shame of being branded terrorists in their own land. Steam issued from his family's still warm bodies, dissolving in the cold air. The head of his infant brother lay in the ditch, his eyes wide open in fear or question. He couldn't tell. That was it, he couldn't take it anymore. He flicked open the plastic casing that protected the button, and closed his eyes as his thumb punched it hard. Chapter 1. Mona. In the bathroom, Mona closed her eyes, but the gruesome images kept playing in her head. The news channels had had a field day. The children. The suicide bomber didn't even spare the children, the newscasters had all yelled in unison. The whole street had worn a scene of helplessness, dead bodies covered in white sheets being carried away on stretchers toward the ambulances, every house on the street standing bereft of its window panes. Multicolored curtains billowing out in the crisp March wind like a scene from a horror movie, shocked and disheveled men pointing at a disintegrated mass of concrete and steel, which had just hours ago been the hidden office of some clandestine agency's headquarters. Reports coming in from the hospitals were also far from encouraging. The terrorists might never stop, they said. Not until they've destroyed Pakistan. Mona sighed as she opened her eyes. Pakistan was under attack, and all the people in this house were concerned about was what to wear tomorrow. Rolling a wad of tissue paper over her index finger, she leaned toward the mirror, and tried to wipe the mascara that seemed to have leaked from around her eyes, but looking closely, she noticed that the blotches were actually dark circles. A solitary tear escaped her left eye and slid down her cheek, staining her pink chiffon camise. She had been crying a lot these past few months. Each bomb blast shook her in a physical way, deepening her fear that the world was falling apart just like her marriage. Opening her Chanel handbag, she rummaged inside for her touche éclat to hide the tear tracks. She had left her friends in the drawing room with their favorite Belgian chocolate and Brazil imported coffee. It was imperative that she should join them soon, lest they started questioning her whole existence. Inside the bag, her hand brushed against her iPhone. She hesitated before fishing it out. No messages or missed calls. For the 10th time that day, she dialed the same number. The line rang and rang. Mona tapped her foot on the hard stone floor. Suicide bombs and an absent husband, how had it all come to this? Reciting an ayat from the Holy Quran, she took a deep breath, and blew it across the bathroom in an attempt to ward off evil. Bilal picked up at the last ring. What? He asked irritably. Gripping the marble slab supporting the wash basin, she took a deep breath. Where have you been? Work. Mona took another deep breath. Why haven't you called me back? What part of the word work didn't you get? Typical, Bilal. Do you have any idea how terrified I've been? Her voice rose as she pronounced each syllable with force, something she knew Bilal hated. Your secretary wouldn't tell me anything. Do you realize a bomb just detonated in the city? And in our neighborhood? Bilal tooted. Sarah is sitting right in front of me, and it's not her fault. I've been busy, Mona, and for God's sake, don't make a fuss. You know how important this deal with the investors from Dubai is for me. I hardly ever check my phone these days. Mona lowered her voice knowing that it carried out of mobile phones, and that Sarah would be trying to listen in, ever hungry for a stray crumb of gossip. That bitch. But the bomb blast, she said quietly. Surely you must have heard. Bilal cut her off. Of course I heard, but I simply presumed that you were safe at home since I called Amma, and honestly the work here has been so hectic lately, his voice tapered off as he realized his mistake. Listen. Mona forgot about Sarah. You called your mother, and didn't even bother to check on me? What kind of a person are you? Do you even care about me? The country blows up, and that still doesn't make me any more worthy of Bilal Sahab's attention? I mean, I left you 10 calls. 10. And you didn't see fit to reply to any of them. Oh, but you had time to call your dear Emma. Bilal was silent. The sound of his deep breathing and the occasional rustle of papers in the background was the only indication that he was still on the line. After what seemed like ages, he replied, Don't tell me that all of a sudden you care, Mona. The line went dead. Blood rushed to her face, her fingers still gripping the cold marble slab. Her hand had turned blue from the pressure, the white knuckles protruding out like giant hills while the rest of her body shook as if in extreme pain. Chucking the phone into her bag, she wiped her clammy hands on one of the imported towels she had flown in from Dubai. What a waste, she thought. Now. She threw it in the rubbish. Before a rogue sob could escape her mouth, she unlocked the door, and went off to the drawing room. Asterisk. Oh yes, yes, yes. Kulsum squealed, jumping up from the divan in excitement. Her generous bosom heaved as she danced about, wrapping the expensive shatush shawl around her shoulders. She did a little twirl around the drawing room. Look at this, Mona. Isn't it a rare beauty? Mona looked around in surprise. Moments ago, before she had left for the bathroom, the drawing room had been a picture of solemnness, with each of her 3 friends, Kulsum, Shabina, and Alia, distraught at the injustice of 16 people losing their lives, not to mention the dozens that were still fighting for theirs in hospitals. Kulsum had even made a bold claim to visit the public wards of hospitals to commiserate with her fellow Lahoris. But now, the maroon velvet curtains had been thrown back from all the windows in a bid to invite a steady stream of sunshine. A steaming pot of aromatic coffee complete with a porcelain china set had been laid out on the coffee table, and the disturbing announcements from the television had been muted. For a moment, Mona simply stood there, inhaling the scent. Whatever they said about coffee was absolutely true, there was something about it that soothed the mind. Shagufta, one of her maidservants, scurried in bearing a tray laden with sandwiches and pastries from the exclusive bakery near Hussein Chowk. Mona knew that because, like always, the blundering woman had forgotten to remove the food from its paper boxes. With the lids thrown back and the food ensconced inside, it looked like something a middle-class family would serve. She rolled her eyes. What had happened to the crystal serving dishes? But before she could chastise the maid, her eyes caught a pair of smiling Pathan salesmen leaning against the giant wooden fireplace, starched turbans standing upright on their heads and smart Peshawari chapel so polished that they shone. The younger of the two had his arms stretched wide, and balanced on top of them were the most colorful and expensive shatush shawls she had ever seen. Shagufta laid out the food on the table. Her fearful eyes darted toward Mona, and then back at the packed food on the tray. She clapped a hand to her mouth, and hastily retreated to the kitchen, her plastic flip-flops making a distinct and unpleasant sound. Shabina and Alia also stood gawking at the shawls, their eyes round with wonder. Alia had her hand pressed against her chest, though it was difficult to Tell whether this was in appreciation of the shawls or a desperate bid to flaunt the huge rock on her finger. Mona winced at the light reflecting off the diamond. Her eyes swiveled toward the shawls once more. They really were handsome. Each shawl cost a whopping 1,000,000 rupees, much more expensive than the average Chanel or Louis Vuitton stole. Even in her despondent state, Mona felt a prick of desire for them. Made from the finest fur of the Chiru, Bibi, the older Pathan whose hands were free, announced. The best in the entire country. End of season sale. He nodded at Mona, the new arrival. Specially brought to you from Kashmir. Mona's eye caught a light beige-colored one with heavy embroidery of gold, red and green thread. It was gorgeous, but her earlier disappointment at Bilal's behavior still stood stark in her mind, and ignoring the Pathan, she sank into the armchair without a word. Gazing out in the vast gardens of her mansion, she sighed. People would laugh at her if she told them that despite everything, her home felt like a prison to her. Holding her scarf in place over her head, Shabina leaned forward. At 48, Shabina believed that she had seen everything there was to see. And done everything there was to do. Her main priority now was her dedication to Islam and its teachings. Or so she liked people to believe. Raising a cup of coffee to her lips, she arched a plucked eyebrow. Kulsum thought it would be a good idea to break the dreadful monotony of listening to people getting killed. You were in the bathroom, so she decided to take matters into her own hands, and asked for these gentlemen to present themselves here. She gestured at the Pathans behind her. The older Pathan spat a gob of chewed pan on the floor. He had been aiming for the dustbin in the corner, but instead the bits of betel leaf, stained red with spices and supri, landed on the white marble. This time, another maid, Mona had forgotten her name, ran inside holding a wet rag. Alia grimaced. Gentlemen, indeed. Shabina shot her a dirty look before pursing her chapped lips, and busying herself with her coffee. Not wearing any lipstick was her way of making a religious statement. Mona felt a nudge from Alia. Shabina got herself the new limited edition Estee Lauder fragrance, she whispered, raising her eyebrows. Can you smell it? It smells like tuberoses. Chuckling, she added, looks like someone's dying to make an impression at the party. Shabina seemed to have heard her. She tucked a stray lock of hair beneath the scarf, and fixed Alia with a solemn stare. I doubt that I'll go. The event seems a bit decadent for my taste. Alia scowled. Oh please, Shabina, this statement doesn't suit you. This is what the ones not invited to the party are saying. You know better than that. Oh, Mira's party, you mean? Oh Han. Mona cried, just remembering the thing they had been discussing for weeks. In the midst of the bomb blast and Shagufta's blunders, she had forgotten it. Mira Siddiqui, her long-lost friend who had left Lahore right after they had graduated from college. Now 20-odd years later, she had returned. Thrice divorced at the age of 41, and now the proud owner of a successful modeling agency, she had purchased a sprawling property in Kant, and had decided to throw a huge housewarming bash. Also poised to be her inaugural fashion show in Lahore, it had the temperature soaring in the Lahori society circuit for days. People had even cut short their holidays abroad, just to be at the party. Oh yes, about the party, Alia continued, biting into a pineapple glazed pastry. She's invited all the politicians too. Imagine the nerve. She barely arrives, and everyone here is clamoring to meet her. And they blame us for giving Lahore a bad name. Fine, we like to party, but we're not as crazy as to host modeling shows in our own homes. Who wants that kind of bad publicity? I mean, I caught Fahad trying on his Walima tuxedo the other day. For Mira's party. Paunch and all. She threw her head back and laughed. Mona liked it when she did that, it made her look a decade younger. Crossing her legs, and settling her hands around them, Alia exclaimed, I bet you every scrawny ass will be there, and probably most of the fat ones too. Thank God. Kulsum wasn't invited or she'd have driven us crazy by now. Busy with the Pathans, Kulsum was oblivious to the whole conversation. Mona's stomach clenched. 20 years. She couldn't believe it had been that long since they had last met. She thought of those moments when, depending on the season, they would share a hot cup of chai or a cone of watery vanilla ice cream in Liberty Market. Young men would gawk at them as they tossed their dyed golden brown hair from side to side, and sometimes Mira would make deliberate eye contact with them, to which they would respond with expressions of alarm and outrage. If they can stare so openly, then why can't we? Mira used to say. On occasion, she would also show a guy the finger. Back then, a girl showing you a finger was considered a taxi. That's the name for a woman of bad character, Mira informed her, when Mona had expressed her confusion. There would always be a knowing gleam in her eyes, a sense of superiority regarding such matters. A taxi accepts anyone who is willing to pay for its services, just like a woman from Hiramundi is ready to sleep with anyone who throws her money. These women are adept at showing guys the finger, as sometimes they don't cough up the money after they've had their fun. She winked at her, and being young and carefree, they fell into fits of laughter. Good times, Mona thought. She could hardly remember her youth anymore. Perhaps meeting Mira wouldn't be such a bad idea. Even with the curtains pushed back to expose the lovely March weather, she felt claustrophobia in the overheated drawing room. With the air conditioners undergoing maintenance, the room seemed to have heated up like a stove. She looked down and her eyes caught the light, barely discernible blemishes on the backs of her hands. And to think that she had never cooked or cleaned in her entire life. The claustrophobia gave way to helplessness as she thought of her futile attempts at fighting aging. All those lotions, the groundbreaking creams that came with the promise of eternal youth, they were all useless. There was no escape from the sharp, twisted tangles of time as they continued to scratch and devour you. Kulsum was laughing away, trying shawl after shawl, while posing and blowing kisses in the air like some glorified model. The Pathan salesman's smiles widened with each passing minute. I'll have that one, and this one, Kulsum cried, pointing at 3 shawls, each being in the same shade of the color brown. Are you sure? They're pure shatush. The older Pathan held a hand over his heart in mock horror. Why, Bibi. Upon my word, this is pure shatush. Pass it through that diamond ring on your finger. I'll cut off my head if it gets stuck in it. The Pathan formed a circle with his thumb and forefinger and passed his forefinger from the other hand through it. Well, that's a fancy way of showing it, Alia mumbled, and before Mona could stop to think, the two of them broke into gales of laughter. She blushed at Alia's childish implication to sex, but that was partly the reason why she loved her friends. They would burst out laughing at one thing or another, and suddenly every former grievance was forgiven and forgotten, not that she had any with them at the moment. Even tightly wound Shabina let out an uptight giggle, her scarf falling off to reveal golden streaked hair. Kulsum stood looking confused and embarrassed. "Oh Kulsum!" Alia exclaimed. "You're just like that donkey in the zoo." That never gets the joke. That elicited even more laughter from everyone, and poor Flushing. Kulsum covered her face and ran out of the room with the Pathan's clothes at her heels. "I'm never going to forgive you girls for this," she wailed from the doorway. "Oh, she'll come around," Shabina said, wiping the black kajal that had smudged around her wet eyes. Where would Kulsum be without the drama in her life? The sound of Shagufta's rubber flip-flops sounded in the hall once again. And Mona looked up to see her maid wearing the grim expression she reserved for special occasions. "Bilal Sahab has arrived, Baiji," she announced. "He's asked for you in the study." Mona sat stunned for a moment. So, he had finally arrived. He must have taken the lounge entrance into the house. The fact that he hadn't stepped in to greet the ladies meant that he was still seething from their earlier conversation. "We'll show ourselves out, shall we?" Alia spoke up, rising from her seat.